Welcome back, focused learners, to another explainer. Okay, today we're tackling something big. It's a heavy, heavy burden that almost anyone trying to make something new inevitably feels. You know what I'm talking about, right? The crushing modern anxiety of the blank page. That profound, totally intimidating expectation that true brilliance means you somehow have to conjure a groundbreaking idea entirely out of thin air. Well, today we're going to completely deconstruct the myth of the solitary romantic genius and hopefully relieve you of a lot of that pressure along the way.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really grasp how deeply ingrained this myth is in our culture, just listen to this lyric from Van Morrison's track, Big Time Operators. He sings, "They were glorified by the media. They were heroes who had names." I mean, it perfectly captures how we worship modern creators, doesn't it? We celebrate them as these heroic, isolated individuals who just inherently own their brilliant, completely original intellectual property. But as you'll see today, this is actually a massive, historically inaccurate illusion.
So here is our roadmap across 4,000 years of history. We'll start with the solitary genius myth, explore the ancient weavers of words, trace the commodifying of the written text, uncover the invention of the romantic author, and finally arrive at our return to collaborative creation today. All right, Section 1, the solitary genius myth.
Whether you're a writer, a startup founder, an engineer, or an artist, you face this immense pressure today to create something completely unprecedented. You're supposed to be that lone, brooding artist or the rogue inventor toiling away in a garage. This modern expectation is built entirely on the concept of creation ex nihilo, which literally means creation out of nothing. It's this belief that a valued idea has to be a magical, spontaneous spark, absolutely divorced from any past influence. But here's the secret that history reveals to us. True innovation and creativity have always been deeply combinatorial, collaborative, and cumulative. The anxiety you feel trying to create from nothing, it's based on an expectation that, historically, didn't even exist.
Which brings us to Section 2, ancient weavers of words.
To really see this in action, we have to travel way back to ancient Mesopotamia over 4,000 years ago to meet Enheduanna. She was an Akkadian high priestess and literally the very first known named author in world literature. Now, ancient scribes like her viewed their craft completely differently than we do. They explain their creativity through two distinct metaphors. First, the dreamers, who basically acted as channels relaying divine supernatural visions. And second, the weavers, who meticulously built their texts out of the physical and cultural materials left behind by those who came before them. Essentially, they were early remixers. Enheduanna proudly referred to herself as a weaver of tablets. She wasn't spinning threads from thin air. She took the heavy, resistant threads of ancient, established traditions and uniquely patterned them on her own loom.
Let's move to and see how this built, because this weaving process was absolutely not a solo act. It built a really strict chain of custody. You see, ancient authorship was a multi-step, collective enterprise. First, you had the divine revelation or inspiration. Second was the author's translation, the actual weaving of the text, but it didn't stop there. Third, the work depended entirely on a singer's public recitation to actually give those words breath and sound. And fourth, it only survived through the scribe's careful circulation. Without the singer's voice or the scribe's hand, the author essentially didn't exist. So when did all of this change? Well, that brings us to Section 3, commodifying the written text. The absolute catalyst for this huge shift was Johannes Gutenberg's printing press back in the 1440s. Think about this. Before this machine, hand-copying manuscripts might get you, maybe 40 pages a day, and a whole lot of hand cramps. Gutenberg's machine skyrocketed that to 3,600 pages a day. It was just an unprecedented shift in scale. Suddenly, text wasn't just an ephemeral sound or some rare, sacred manuscript anymore. It was a mass-produced, physical commodity that could be bought, sold, and hoarded in a rapidly expanding market. Following this massive technological shockwave came the legal frameworks to actually manage it. In 1710, Britain passed the Statute of Anne, the world's first copyright law. But here's the kicker. It wasn't passed to champion the natural rights of artists or honor art. No way. It was an economic lever pulled by the government to break publishing monopolies and manage commercial assets. By vesting print rights directly in authors for a limited time, the law inadvertently created this profound new identity, the author as a property owner. This legal framework evolved super fast, and by the 1886 Berne Convention, this concept of the author as a property owner essentially became global law.
But listen, the law alone couldn't turn writers into these celebrated cultural heroes. That required a massive philosophical shift. Section 4.
inventing the Romantic author.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happened during the 18th and 19th centuries. Society went through this total paradigm shift. For centuries, we held this classical view of the mirror, meaning art was supposed to gracefully reflect nature, and creating it was a deliberate, mechanical craft. The author was a master remixer, right? But then came the Romantic view, the lamp. Expectations completely inverted. Suddenly, authors were burdened with the expectation of being a lamp, emitting completely original, unbidden light directly from their own internal soul, totally divorced from any past tradition.
Writer Edward Young basically threw the whole classical weaver idea out the window. In his 1759 manifesto, Conjectures on Original Composition, he used this incredibly powerful organic metaphor. He argued that true creation is spontaneous, natural growth. An imitator builds a machine out of borrowed parts, but a true genius, they grow a flower from their own roots. Literally overnight, borrowing became a terrible sin, and spontaneous, magical originality became the ultimate sacred prize.
This whole mysticism of the mind was really cemented by German philosophers like Immanuel Kant and Fichte through what's known as the personality theory. They argued that while ideas might be common, the unique form of expression is the inalienable property of the author's personality. They inextricably linked the creator's very soul to their intellectual property. So copyright was no longer just some bureaucratic state privilege. It was suddenly viewed as a natural, almost divine right springing instantly from the act of creation. The myth was fully constructed. And it is the exact same myth that gives you writer's block today. Which brings our historical journey right back to the present day. Section 5. Return to collaborative creation.
Now that we know this 18th century lone genius is largely an illusion, let's look at some hard data to tear down the facade and see how modern creation actually happens. Take the massive industrial scale of commercial publishing. Between 2006 and 2010, 1 in every 17 novels sold in the United States was authored by James Patterson. Think about that volume. At one point, he was publishing 13 books a year. One human simply cannot produce that much polished writing from a sudden bolt of inspiration. He operates a highly collaborative factory. He writes outlines, hires co-writers, acts as an editor, and runs quality control.
So, the crucial point is exactly what philosopher Michel Foucault observed. In highly commercial models, the singular name on a book cover is really just an author function. It's a trademark. It's a corporate stamp of approval assuring you, the reader, that you're buying a specific product. The celebrated romantic name on the cover is frequently just a brand, completely obscuring the messy, cumulative, collaborative reality taking place behind the scenes, very much like Alexander Dumas' massive writing factory back in the 19th century.
And honestly, when we look at the digital network today, it is so clear that we are firmly returning to the collaborative, combinatorial roots of those ancient weavers. Think about it. 6 million paper slips mailed in by everyday people literally built the Oxford English Dictionary. Wikipedia bypassed the named hero entirely to rely on the consensus of the crowd. Transformative cultures like fanfiction platforms see creators thriving by freely mixing and reshaping established worlds, acting exactly like ancient scribes. In generative AI, it acts as this massive digital scripter, rapidly recombining vast databases of pre-existing human culture. We are finally collapsing the rigid rules of the print era.
The illusion of creation ex nihilo is fading, leaving us with this really provocative final thought. Knowing that all creation is ultimately a beautifully complex combinatorial collaboration, does the solitary author, as we've known it for the last few centuries, even still exist today? Or is it finally time to drop that crushing anxiety of the blank page, embrace the wisdom of the crowd, and step proudly into our new role as active digital orchestrators? The threads are waiting for you to weave them. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.